What are the logical deductions that says that there is a God?
So I think I touched on this last time, if I'm not mistaken, but there's a few things for me that point very convincingly and compellingly. I don't think you can ever have proof on anything 100%. That would also partly, I think, take away part of the principle of like free will, the ability to actually choose a relationship rather than be imposed and forced on you where you have no choice. That's part of why Judaism says God in some respects hides his face from the world, so we have the free will to choose a relationship and not be forced on us, because he wants any healthy relationship isn't one where people are forced into it. That's why, by the way, you often find that it can sometimes be difficult relationships between teachers and students. If the student sort of feels, well, I have to be here, I'm forced to be here, whereas the teacher may, same with parent and child, but hopefully in relationships, by the way, hopefully they can get to healthy places, but it's the extent to which both parties choose the relationship that determines the strength of it. That's a key rule of relationships. And so obviously the healthiest and hopefully the most close will be one in which two partners come together in a marriage where it's entirely free will. So that's just one side point. But I think there's a huge amount of points to consider that's pointed me logically towards the idea of a creator, an intelligent creator. The first thing to note in terms of like what science tells us, because people think religion often flies in the face of science, or God flies in the face of science. Well, let's think about what we know so far about the world and its origins. Okay, for thousands of years, the consensus was. Does anyone know that the world was eternal or the world had a beginning? Sorry? So that's the consensus today, but it was not the consensus for thousands of years. They thought the world's always been here, it's eternal. And so, therefore, if the world's always been here, then I think that's a logically flawed way of making sense of things, because then how do things change? How do they evolve? But let's just say it has always been here. Then do you need a creator? No. But in the 60s, there was the revolution of the Big Bang Theory, where scientists were looking in their microscope into the universe and they were seeing stars expanding, the universe expanding, and they realized that actually, if we were just to press the rewind button, it would all go back to an original point, hence the Big Bang Theory. Now, so that's premise one. The consensus today in science is the universe had a beginning. Everything we know, every finite element to this universe, time, space, matter, had a beginning. Premise number two, every effect has a cause. Okay? Is that a basic rule of the universe? Absolutely. Okay? So, the universe had a beginning. Every effect has a cause. So what was the cause of the effect of the Big Bang? The universe had a beginning. Everything finite had a beginning. What caused that to begin? So you have two options here, okay? Because we can't, with science, we can't look into outside of the finite dimensions of the universe, right? We can't do that. It's not possible. So this can't be something that we can test in a lab. It's simply a logical deduction. Is it more plausible to say that nothing caused something, that there is no cause that created the effect of the Big Bang? Or is it more plausible to say that there is a cause, but that cause is not confined to the limits of our finite universe? What's more plausible? I think it's more plausible to say that there's a cause that's not bound by the rules of finiteness, that is infinite, right? So that's just an initial point, just to say that I don't think there's a contradiction between what science tells us about the origins of the universe. But then we come to the specifics. Okay, but that could be anything. Something infinite could be anything. Why do you necessarily point towards God, and certainly the Jewish God? So for me, what makes the Torah a compelling account of who the creator really is primarily, there's many things I could touch on, and we unfortunately have limited time, but for me the primary thing, and I think I did touch upon this actually in the last time I came here, is the prophecies that are explicitly foretold in the Torah and how they've manifested. So let me just elaborate on that, because that might sound a bit general and a bit vague, so I'll be very specific. So we know that the Torah, as in its written form today, has existed in its form for at least 2,000 years, because we have the Greek translations of the Torah from 2,000 years ago, the Septuagint. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so we know that it hasn't been tampered with. That's point number one. Point number two, what are some of the things the Torah tells us is going to happen? It says, and this is in the final book of the 5 books of Moses, and in Deuteronomy, there are specific prophecies that Moses tells the Jewish people are going to take place throughout Jewish history. And they are the fact that the Jewish people are going to be eternal. They're going to always be around, despite the fact that many other nations and empires will come and go. And we've seen that happen throughout history. The ancient empires, the Torah lists, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, all gone. We were the same size as them, if not smaller. And the Jewish people remain. Meanwhile, many nations and great empires, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Egyptians, they've all come and gone, despite often having an issue with the Jews. So we've maintained our presence, been eternal. We've been few in number constantly throughout our history, bubbling at around maximum 16 million. There's less Jews today still than there were before the Holocaust, which is pretty shocking. But that just shows the extent of what happened. So we've always been few in number. I mean, 60 million is tiny. There's nearly 80 million Brits, aren't there? Like, this is a tiny number. And despite that, been few in number, despite being scattered all over the world throughout most of our history, unlike every other nation, basically. Every other nation has a common land, language, and culture. But for most of our history, we did have our ancient Jewish sovereign state, and then the Romans came and scattered the Jews all over the world. So they've been scattered throughout most of their history. Okay, if I was to go around the room, and I always say this in the Jewish society, if I was to ask the Jewish people in the room where your grandparents from, whether then about 10 people would have a world tour. Okay, mine are from South Africa and Poland and Russia, but so there's been this unusual national occurrence where we've gone fully international throughout most of our history, scattered, intensely persecuted in an unparalleled way, in an unparalleled level of intensity. So you have that. And then on top of that, there's been the survival of the Jews, despite all these things which any sociologist will tell you is going to destroy them. But they've been, not only that, they've also dramatically changed the world's value system, where the majority of the world today worships the God of Abraham through the monotheistic offshoots of Christianity and Islam. Many of the values that shape the Western world, even American democracy and the Constitution, they were so explicitly and deeply inspired by the values of the Hebrew Bible and the lessons of it, the idea of all human beings being created in God's image, the sanctity of human life, family values, education as a human right, the importance of social responsibility. These were not values articulated by the other foundations of the Western world like Greece and Rome. So you've got all of that, which is an amazing story, amazing. And then on top of that, you have this remarkable relationship the Jewish people have with the land of Israel. So in that same speech that Moses gives, he says to the Jews, they're about to enter the land of Israel. Moses is about to die. He's like, he's standing on the mountain saying, I'm seeing the promised land, but I'm not going to go in. And he tells them all these things are going to happen in your history. And he says, soon after you get here, you're going to get dispersed and exiled. But at the end of history, you're going to be returned to this land. And we're seeing this remarkable story in our times. This incredible miracle of the Jewish people returning to their ancient God-given homeland. And we've seen that in the last 75 years. And this is a story that no other nation has ever experienced in their history. Can you tell me any other nation that has lost their common language and culture, and then 2,000 years later, despite having all the odds stacked against them, return to their land in the most incredible way? And by the way, this is part of the reason why Israel is such a threat and a nuisance to religious extremists in other religions, because they thought the Jews were forsaken by God, basically. And that was the narrative for 2,000 years. And they thought, well, we're the new ones that are going to take God's message forward. And actually, it turns out that God never did forsake the Jewish people. And that's why they have to think, well, no, it must be this is just an evil that needs to be destroyed. But that's what's going on here. That's what's really going on in the all the things that we're seeing today. But the point is that if all these things had happened, right, this incredible miracle of Jewish history, if they had happened on their own, I might look at it and I'd say, well, it's amazing, but maybe we just got lucky, okay? But it's the fact that all these things that I listed were explicitly prophesied in the Torah, right? The fact that the Jewish people, it says, you shall be few in number, among the nations that I will send you to. You will be scattered all over the world. You will be intensely persecuted. You will be a light to the nations. You will be the eternal nation. I will disperse you from the land and it will be desolate. And then you'll return to the land at the end of it. All these things clearly foretold. And so my question is, logically, this is the original question here, logically, what's more plausible? That human beings 2,500 years ago made these educated guesses? But the problem is they're not educated guesses because they fly in the face of everything we know about history. They fly in the face of the story of every other nation. So they'd be going out on a huge, gamble. Because how can they be sure it's going to happen? Or is it more plausible that actually the author of the Torah is who it claims to be? God, who is not bound by time and can know the future. So for me is a massive clincher in saying that actually it's very plausible. This story of Jewish history and it's being foretold, to me, is very, very, creates a very plausible, logical case to say that there is actually a deeper spiritual underpinning to the world. And that for me was what really kicked off my journey.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.